All right, welcome, welcome. So sorry for the delay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me, Michelle? Jennifer, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, okay, great. I
Like
see.
9 a.m.
Michelle, I think you might want to turn off your microphone.
I was able to
Okay.
mute her. Thank you so much for your patience while we worked out that technical difficulty. And thank you to the people on the back end for working out the technical difficulty. Now that I see the room filling, the Zoom room filling, I will give everybody a minute or so to filter in. While you're filtering in, I'm just curious for those of you who are here now, what time it is where you are and maybe what day it is, because it might not be the same day for all of us coming from different parts of the world. And that'll just give us a window into the diversity of locations, people attending today. See that filtering in, almost 4 p.m. Friday at 2:50. You're Jessica. Hi, Jessica. You're in Los Angeles like me. Way too hot today here. Good to see everybody. Again, thank you for your patience. So this workshop is early sharing behaviors and social development among infants and toddlers with Jennifer Doebler. I'm Melissa Coyne, and I'm a RIE Associate and RIE's Program Director. Just a couple logistics. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A box. That's where along the way, or even before we start, if you have questions for Jennifer, you can put your questions there. And then you're also using the chat box. And there will be some questions that Jennifer will ask, where she'll ask you to use the chat box to answer. So you can ask your questions in the question and answer, and give your answers to questions in the chat. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker. Jennifer Doebler lives in Berkeley, California, but I do want to add that she is presenting today from her vacation in Kauai. So thank you, Jennifer, for that. She is the mother of 2 and a RIE Associate. Jennifer holds a master's degree in human development from Pacific Oaks College, an MBA in marketing and management from Columbia University, and a bachelor's in international politics and economics from Middlebury College. Jennifer is a RIE Practicum Mentor, member of the RIE Board of Directors, and chair of the Marketing Committee. Jennifer facilitates RIE classes in San Francisco's East Bay and consults with parents and childcare professionals. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience and resilience in waiting for us to figure out some of these technical challenges. And Melissa, I just wanted to ask you one question. Since it's 12:53, do I need to, this finishes at, well, that's where you guys are, right? Do I need to go faster?
I would say go ahead and give your presentation, and then if that does bump into the Q&A time, we can always offer people the opportunity to ask you questions on the forum in Whova.
Okay, great.
Let's do that.
Okay. All right, so let me get started. And do I need to share my video? No, it's already sharing. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me for my discussion of early sharing behaviors and social development.
Jennifer,
yes?
Sorry to interrupt. We don't see your video. You have to
That's what I was wondering, if I thought I had already shared screen.
Yeah, share screen.
It disappeared. Hold on a second. There it is.
when we were queued up before the technical
There we go.
difficulties, it was all on
There
screen.
we go. Okay.
Now we're good. All right.
Okay, are we good now? Okay, well, so thank you for joining me. What I'm going to be presenting today is the work I did to receive my master's degree at Pacific Oaks. It's the research I did for my thesis. And some of what I present today might be very familiar to all of you who've been working with children for a long time, whether it's in the classroom or at home. But I'm hoping that what I provide is sort of a different framework, a different way of seeing things by the end of the presentation that you can consider and see if it applies to your practice. Okay? So one of the things that I've noticed in my years teaching parent-infant guidance classes is that sharing or the lack of sharing is a concern for us adults. Many of us get uncomfortable with it. And I guess I'd love to start a chat about why do you think that is? If you could just take a moment and type in the chat why you think we get concerned about sharing, even among infants and toddlers. Yeah, people worry that it's a reflection of their own parenting or some cultural aspect of what they're doing. Yeah, we worry our kids will be selfish or spoiled. Yep. Concerns about people judging us for our children not sharing yet, right? Yeah, we have an issue of fairness. We have this idea of fairness that's really important to us, and it's a good idea, right? But where does it apply? We're brought up that it's important, that we need to be supporting sharing. We like to avoid conflict. Yes, I think that's an interesting one also. We can have adherence to rigid and inappropriate social expectations. Yeah, sometimes that's what's happening. Ooh, we equate sharing with kindness. I think that's right. There's a lot of things that get sort of dumped on top of sharing, right? Other values and ideas, as we're saying here. Right, we're concerned children won't share when they're older. And someone else is saying the adult concept of ownership, right? We have this idea of ownership. Who's owning it right now? They're using it right now. All those different things. Thank you for adding those chats to enrich our conversation. I think all those things are some of the things that are going on for us that make us a little uncomfortable sometimes around sharing. And as somebody sort of said, I sometimes think it's just that, we don't like what not sharing is. I don't know what the word for not sharing is, right? Maybe it is conflict. And my colleague Patty Ryan has spoken at past conferences very eloquently about conflict. So yeah, there's all sorts of reasons that we can be uncomfortable with it. Now, in my research, we know that the conventional wisdom is that children don't share officially until they are between 3.5 and 4 years old, right? But according to research by 0 to 3, 43% of parents between their children can learn to share before age 2. So my next question is, what do you think? Can children share before the age of 2? And I've put a poll out there. I'd love to see you vote, if you wouldn't mind. Ooh, this is coming in fast and furious. It's exciting. Let's see. I'm going to give it a second so more people can vote. Only 5% vote. Oh, now half of you have voted. Okay. Here we go. Almost everybody has voted. Let's give everybody a second. So, can children share before the age of 2? Here's what we're saying right now. 46% of you are saying yes, they can. 24% of you are saying no, they cannot. And 31% of you are saying maybe they can. Okay. Thank you for participating in that. I hope I can save that. Okay. So we have these different opinions. It's not a really clear picture. And that makes a lot of sense because some of the research suggests that the early emergence and development of sharing is the least understood of all pro-social behaviors. So pro-social behaviors are helping, empathizing, and sharing, okay? And what they've realized is that we know a lot about how young children share with their parents. We know a little bit more about how preschoolers share. We've seen some infant research, but there's kind of a gap around toddlers. And one of the other things that makes it hard to understand is that sharing is a complex social task and has a longer trajectory than other pro-social behaviors. So there is this sort of developmental pathway that they're seeing that's a little less, that's a little bit more complicated than sort of simply helping or empathizing, according to researchers. Now, as someone who works with Magda Gerber's ideas, educaring, I am someone who can't help but look at every question I have with this idea that if infants are ready to do something, they will do it. In fact, when they're ready, they have to do it, right? So when I was wondering about this issue of sharing, I thought, well, if they could do it, they would, right? But I also can't help but think about this idea that an infant always learns. The less we interfere with the natural process of learning, the more we observe how much infants learn all the time. So Magda's words bringing us back to how important it is to observe, to look at children from a capabilities perspective. What are they learning? So as I was working on my thesis and developing what I wanted to write about, I came up with this sort of thesis question. And it's sort of a two-parter. If infants and toddlers aren't officially sharing yet, what are they doing and learning with objects and peers? So that was my thesis question. 2 parts. And why does it really matter? Well, because between 1 and 2 years old, 12 to 24 months, play with objects constitutes about 60 to 80% of peer social play behaviors. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff going on. So it comes up a lot as a topic, and that's why I wanted to also sort of investigate it. Now, as I was thinking about how I wanted to go about my research, I couldn't help but have a little bit of an admitted bias about the Rye classroom, because I think that the Rye classroom really offers an environment to observe infant and toddlers' sort of innate tendencies, as close as we can get to them, because we have this belief, based on Magda's words, that when we make a child share, it's not sharing, right? So we don't encourage sharing, we don't direct children to share, we leave them to interact with objects, just with the limit that we don't let people hurt each other, right? So here I was thinking, oh, the Rye classroom would be a great place to actually do some research and observe what's happening. So I was thinking, oh, I'll research in my classroom, because I had discovered that there's this whole teacher-researcher model, which many of you probably already know about it. And I thought that will be really fun. I know these children so well. How nice to observe in my own classroom. And then I was planning my research. We were supposed to start our research in March 2020. And we all know what happened in March 2020. That's part of why we're living in challenging times and trying to thrive. COVID hit. And so I was really in a quandary. What am I going to do? And luckily, I was having a conversation with one of my dear friends, someone I met with my own children in parent-infant guidance classes, Rye associate Kristen Eliasberg. She's a mentor and a licensed social worker now. And she told me that she had 2 classes videotaped from 2016, and that she could get permission for me to use them for my research. And she saved the day for me. So I had to give up my idea of doing live research, but I gained something in doing research with video, and I'm hoping that you'll get to see why I think that was such an advantage. So thank you to Kristen for making all this possible. So she had 2 weekly parent-infant guidance classes. They're 90 minutes each class, as you know. 2 classes, that's 180 minutes of video I got to observe. And in those classes, there were 6 participants. They were 16 to 24 months old. They were there with either their mom or their dad. They were walking comfortably, and they had varying use of language. I didn't hear all that much language on the videotape, which could be one limitation of using video, but I think I caught a lot of it. So there wasn't that much language used, but that's who they were. And the limitations of the research were that my sample size was very small. Obviously, an N of 6 is just a little qualitative study, but the kind of study that can give you some ideas that you can take further if you want them. And it was a homogeneous sample. All the children were white. I might assume that they were middle class, but I don't actually know some of that information. But overall, there was a lack of diversity. And one of the other limitations is that I had to interpret gestures, which, as my thesis advisor told me, one of the reasons why there's so little research in this area is because researchers are loath to interpret gestures. But I think for those of us who work with infants and toddlers, we know that gesture is the language of children, right? And it can be very eloquent. And so I decided to go ahead because I think without actually being willing to interpret gestures and try to keep sort of as clear of a picture of it as we can, we won't be able to make any progress in this area. So I decided to go ahead, but I do recognize that that is a limitation. It's all seen through the filter of my eyes. And of course, I cannot know the motivations of these children to do any of the things that they did. And I don't know what their life is like outside of class. But I do get to see 180 minutes of what they do in class. Okay? So that's what I was working with. So in terms of the environment, here is the RIE environment. And as I said already, I just feel like it allows for this more naturalistic observation of behavior. And I really wanted to do observational research rather than like experimental research, which there's quite a bit of in the research, where they try to provoke children to share in different ways and see what they will do, when, how soon they can get them to do it based on what circumstances. But I really was interested in observational research because my background my corporate career started in marketing research. And I know how great it is to start with just a blank canvas and sort of see what you see and then take it from there. And also, observational research allows us to understand the essence of an experience or a lived phenomenon. And understanding that essence it really resonated with me. So here's a picture of the video I got to observe. As you can see, it's a very simple space, like all RIE parent-infant classrooms. It's got wood floors. The parents sit around the edges of the room on those green cushions. There's a camera placed, you can see it right here at the edge of the room. So you can see the foreground, but I can't see sort of what's underneath that camera. And it's a little bit hard to see in the bright farther end of the room, where there's a row of windows, I believe. And it's a little bit of a pity. I would love to show you some of the things that happened over there because they were very interesting, but you can only really pick them up if you watch them over and over again. So we're going to mostly focus on the foreground. But the other, again, strength of this room is that we let the children determine what they're going to do, and they were not directed or encouraged to share or praised for doing so. Okay? So that's the environment this research took place in. So here are my research subjects. The players were 6 toddlers. There were 2 children who were 16 months old. I called them brown stripes and blue pants in the tradition we have in RIE of not using children's names. And then I had 4 children in sort of the older stage, the pre-operational stage of development. Green stripes and pink pants were both 19 months old. Red pants was 20 months old, and gray shirt was the oldest at 23 months old. And overall, I observed 128 interactions during these 2 classes. So that's about a little bit more than 60 interactions in each class. And each child averaged about 10 interactions with a peer and an object in each class. So again, all of these are bringing an object or involving an object and a peer. I was very focused on the objects and the peer, not just the interactions without objects. And just to help you understand what I started seeing, is that I saw that each interaction actually had these multiple component parts, what I called component actions. And there were over 800 component actions in the research I observed, and I documented all of them. And so on average, there were about 6 actions per interaction, right? So you can imagine, here's an interaction. I might approach with an extended arm. I might show you my object. That's 2 actions so far. We might look at each other. You might take the object from me. I might look at you some more, and then maybe I return to my dad or something like that. Those are sort of the component parts that made up what I called an interaction, okay? So what I found is that the interactions between peers were complex and could be very lengthy, okay? I documented, as I said, all these different actions. There were 70 different sort of pieces of the puzzle that they could use in interacting with each other. An interaction lasted between 5 seconds and 8 minutes. So I think about our observation abilities and how long our attention spans last, right? I had the benefit of video to allow me to sort of really see things. But those are some very long interactions that took place, and they weren't infrequent. And then each interaction involved somewhere on average between 3 actions in the interaction to 20. So they could be just a quick little thing. I'd come in, I take something from you and I run away. Or they could be very involved, where there were like 20 different things going on back and forth. So in my research, I identified 18 common peer interactions using objects. So they involved things like approaching another child, sharing space, sharing a play concept or activity, returning to the parent, competition, giving and taking or turn taking, attention getting, extending the arm, dropping and yielding, exchanging an object, taking an object, walking away, ignoring a bid from a peer, looking at a peer either one way or mutually, giving, and there were lots of variations on that, shared attention and interest, protecting an object, and mutual use of an object. So these were the most common of the many, many different interactions I saw. And they confirmed some previous research that talked about some of these things, had observed some of these things in interactions between peers with objects. So I'd like to share a couple of these, a couple of videos that I used to do my research. And here's one about approaching with an object. It was the most common behavior with peers. So I'm going to tell you, because we're going to just watch them once, I'm going to tell you sort of where to find the action and who's playing in it. So on the bottom left and in the middle of the screen, we're going to see gray shirt, who's down here in the corner, and green stripes. Okay? We're going to watch them interact for a moment. So hopefully you could see that where you are. And you can see, so green stripes was sort of sitting there on the floor, but kind of looking over, and gray shirt slowly made his way over to in front of his classmate and not only approached him, but kind of looked at him, right? So this was one of the most common behaviors I saw. And I noticed that in all the different kinds of ways of approaching, there were some direct approaches where someone walks straight towards someone. There were indirect approaches. Sometimes there were kind of like unintentional ones, and just sort of getting in proximity. It seemed unintentional, but like, oh, hey, look, we're in the same area. Let's interact. So there were a variety of different ways that they went about this. And I also noticed that being close by, or what they call in proximity, was not actually a requirement for interacting with peers and objects. Excuse me. So that's one of the things I observed. Giving was another common behavior in the class. So on the top of the screen, you're going to see brown stripes, he's squatting down right here, and red pants interact. So hopefully you were able to see brown stripes walk over to red pants and 2 times give him, I don't know what the proper name for those are, but those nice covers that you use to cover up a bowl of food or use in the microwave, that they're reusable. And he had pulled them off the floor and brought them to red pants. Red pants hadn't been working with those before. This was just the impulse of brown stripes to do that. And so it seemed to me that in many of these instances, there wasn't necessarily a need for there to be an interest in an object or any particular need for the object that was expressed by the other child, that one child just gave something to another child. And this is a little contrary. Some of the research suggests that children have to be able to express a need, and that is not what I saw here, just to be clear. One of the things you might have also noticed is that red pants, when he was first approached, he kind of looked down. I don't know what was going on, but it's clear that the receiver has to recognize the gesture and the intention of the giver, right, in order to take it, right? He managed to take it both times. Okay, so that's some giving. Now, there were also many attempts to give that were unsuccessful. So on the middle right side of the screen over here, we're going to see Pink Pants, who's sitting on this mattress. There's two dolls there, and then Pink Pants. And here's Green Stripes, and they're going to have an interaction. Okay. So if you could see, she had her arm extended perfectly straight with that doll dangling from it while Green Stripes was facing her. And to me, that looked like an attempt to give something. But one of the things we know from research is that 20 to 30% of social behavior by one infant or toddler to another is ignored by the other child. It's either ignored or they kind of don't know what to do with it, so there's no action. And this seemed to be one of those moments also where there's this sort of ignored bid by one child. You could also see that she put down the doll on the sheepskin. And I did notice several times that there were these alternatives. If somebody wasn't able to receive your gift or the thing that you were handing to them, I did notice children trying to indirectly give the object, sometimes by setting it down right in front of you, or I'm setting it down and I'm looking at you to sort of signal, I'm trying to give this to you. Or sometimes they actually went and brought the object to the child's parent and gave it to them. So maybe those are alternative strategies for giving that they're figuring out. Now, giving food was attempted by the youngest child repeatedly. Because we are maybe a little bit short on time, I'm just going to show you two of these. But if you look at the bottom, it's snack time in the right classroom. And the facilitator has the banana out, and there's a bunch of children around the table. And we'll just watch brown stripes right there, right here, and gray shirt again. It's going to go quickly, so. Oops. He's got his banana that was given to him. Kristen's nicely trying to explain to him that it's for him, but he doesn't want it. So he did that a second time, and then there was a third time. The second time, Gray Shirt also didn't accept the banana, and Brown Stripes also didn't eat the banana. He gave it back to Kristen. And let's see what happened the third time. I don't know why that always makes me smile when he accepts that banana. I find it just really charming. 3 times Brown Stripes has tried to give him the banana, and on the third time he says, okay, I'll take it right out of your hands and into my mouth. So giving food, which some people consider the highest form of sharing because it's sort of a survival instinct, that was attempted repeatedly by the youngest child. So one of the questions I have for you is giving why some people believe infants and toddlers can share before the age of 2. Does giving equal sharing? So if you wouldn't mind putting your answers in the chat, that would be great. Tamika, I see your hand raised. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask Jill to capture that, or Melissa for the end of the presentation, if that's okay. Okay, I see sharing more as a joint engagement. Giving is not sharing. Someone else said yes. That's Bethany. Hi, Bethany. No, it depends. Sometimes yes. I think that it does. Yes, if given freely. Not quite, but definitely a building block. Maybe not, but other-centered. It is other-centered. Okay, Tamika, no problem. It seems like it's a part of sharing, but not all of it. A step in the process. Pre-sharing. Exactly right. Maybe is because what we constitute as sharing, I see giving and the expectation that you won't receive back a consumable as not sharing. Okay. Giving is sharing from the heart. Perhaps it's important to know a person's definition of sharing. Great. Okay, thank you for that, everybody. Okay, so we're not clear. Maybe giving is sharing, maybe it's not. It certainly is like kind of a from the heart activity, but maybe it lacks some of the other qualities that we think of as sharing. Okay. So another thing that I saw was this concept of shared space. This was another common peer-to-peer interaction with objects. Again, because of time, I'll show you there's an attempt here that didn't quite work. It's pink pants and brown stripes up on the top of at the top of the screen. You can see there's some stairs. But here's the second time they tried it. So there they are. Okay, so that's what I called shared space, and that is also what Eckerman and Whatley considered sharing room features, okay, in the past, in their research in the past. Now, another thing I saw was a few examples of toddlers spontaneously sharing play concepts involving objects. Now, clearly it involves an element of imitation, but I saw that they were sharing ideas. So on the bottom left, you're going to see gray shirt initiate something. And then pink pants is over here. And red pants is going to come in from the bottom of the screen. And gray shirt, I had noticed, had been playing with this play schema, for those of you who know those, of putting things on his head and calling them hats, right? I bet many of you have seen this with your own children or in the children in your childcare setting. So let's see what happens. This is a little bit longer of a video. You can hear him saying to his dad, like, have a hat? It's a hat. Now you see pink pants. Here comes red pants. There are two of them with hats. Oh, there's the third. There they all go. Okay, so that was obviously imitation, but in my mind, it was also this idea of they were sharing a play activity, an idea, a play concept, and they were doing it from close up and from far away. And it lasted for some time. Another thing I saw the children working on was the mutual use of an object. So in the center, you can see this blue water bottle, and red pants and here's green stripes, and here's pink pants. She's actually involved as well, and red pants are going to be involved in this. They have a bunch of hair curlers in the classroom, some of which fit nicely in the blue water bottle. You can see he puts his hand over the top sometimes, but he's looking at green stripes. He can't get that in there, but so his classmate tries to get that in there. So to me, that was sort of the beginning of working on mutual use of an object. You saw pink pants working with it, but when red pants showed up, she kind of left there. But green stripes was ready to sort of approach and wait and work, and work on it. And then red pants made room for him. So to me, this points to the value also of large objects with multiple small pieces or multi-piece objects in a classroom so that people can participate in something together. So back to my thesis question. Now, if infants and toddlers aren't officially sharing yet, this is the pre-sharing period, you could see that depending on how you defined it, I was in a little bit of a conundrum because I saw some behaviors that made me wonder about this. So, time for another chat. Now that we've seen all these things, what do you think? Are these children sharing? If you could go ahead and type in your response. Now we have a yes. Another yes. Yes, they are sharing many things, but what adults expect them to share is actually to give and let go. Yes, and Dita is talking about what we call yielding, right? They are sharing space and materials through parallel play. They're sharing space, sharing experiences, unintentionally sharing. Yes, so a bunch of yeses and a bunch of really good insights about what actually, like the parallel play and things like that. Items and space. Yeah, sharing spaces and play. Great. Thank you. They are sharing at their developmental level and understanding of possession of objects and objects. It certainly is spontaneous. Thank you, everybody. So as some of you alluded to, right, our definition of whether they're sharing is going to depend, going to drive how we answer that question, right? So seeing how many different definitions there were in the research of sharing, I also just decided to go back to the old dictionary and see what does Merriam-Webster say about it. And Merriam-Webster defines sharing as to have a portion of something with another person, to give a portion of something to another person, or to use, occupy, or enjoy something jointly with another or others. So as someone pointed out, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which one of you it was, but often we mean it more to yield. Oh, give up this thing that you have for another person, but that's not really the definition of sharing. And even when we think of our own adult sharing, how often is it to yield something to another person? It's more often to give a portion, and sometimes here it wasn't even portions, but to give something, to have something with another person, a portion of something. We share a piece of cake with a friend, right? And I really appreciated this idea that it's using, occupying, or enjoying something jointly with another or other. So Merriam-Webster, in my mind, had a more sort of broad, generous definition of sharing. But again, as I said, the research has all sorts of different opinions about it, right? So some of the oldest research, and one that I particularly appreciate, Reingold, Hay, and West, talks about that sharing need not require personal sacrifice, and that observable behaviors alone prove that infants share of their own initiative early in life. So that's that spontaneity of their own initiative. Now, later on, Brownell and others talked about how sharing entails transferring ownership. But there's also recent research that suggests that the idea of ownership is a cultural idea that doesn't exist in all cultures. It's a particularly Western idea that you have to understand ownership in order to share. What about in cultures where there really isn't ownership, right? So this idea that sharing that requires the sacrifice of physical resources may be a special case of altruistic behavior that develops later in childhood and arises out of a more fundamental pro-social disposition to act on behalf of others that appears in late infancy. So that's kind of a mouthful, but I think from my perspective what it says is that there is this innate sort of tendency, disposition to do sharing behaviors early on in life. And that maybe it gets layered on with complexity, right? It's an early sharing behavior. It grows and grows in complexity based on the culture you're in potentially. And I guess it's my belief that we tend to oversimplify sharing. Again, as someone else mentioned, we often say it to mean yielding something to another person. But I think overall, we kind of treat it as this sort of binary. It's a yes-no behavior, and it's a goal behavior, right? Either they're sharing or they're not sharing. And I think my research identified that there's actually a variety of spontaneous sharing behaviors that these toddlers engaged in. Sharing space, giving with all sorts of variations, sharing play concepts, sharing attention and interest. There's give and take and mutual use, all sorts of things that I saw them doing without any guidance or direction. So now to the second part of the question. They might not be officially sharing yet, but there are some sharing behaviors going on. What are they doing and learning with objects and peers? Okay, so that's the next piece of this. And it wasn't hard to think about all the things that they were learning and all the things that were happening here in terms of their learning. I often like to go and refer back to the early Head Start learning outcomes because I do find them a very clear, handy, sort of, as sometimes we call it, micro milestones, those small gains in development that are so valuable to observe, right? So from the early Head Start learning outcomes, I noticed that, they're clearly in terms of perception, they're using their perceptual information to understand objects, experiences, and interactions. On a communication level, they're using nonverbal communication and language to engage others in interaction, and they're learning so much about that, right? On a cognitive level, they're actively exploring people, right? We often think about actively exploring objects, but they're actively exploring people, their peers here, to understand themselves, others, and objects. I saw some of the older children using their understanding of causal relationships to act on social and physical environments. They were learning to use a variety of strategies in solving problems, right? When you're trying to give something and the other person doesn't quite do that yet, how can you proceed with your goal? And I also saw on a social emotional level that they were showing interest in interacting with and developing personal relationships with other children. And they were showing more awareness of themselves and how to connect with others. So there's so much learning obviously going on here, right? But the other thing is, as I looked at all these different interactions that I observed, they really started reminding me of Piaget's schemas. So as many of you know, especially those of you who studied early childhood, A schema is the structure or organization of actions as they are transferred or generalized by repetition in similar or analogous circumstances, right? It's these actions that we do repeatedly. This is how we think of it more in layman's terms, is these repeated behaviors in children's play that help them understand the world and how things work. And it's not just about objects and natural laws, but it's about people as well. And we also recognize that schemas reflect these uncontrollable inner drives, these urges and impulses to act and to learn from the varying experiences of those actions and the varying outcomes of those actions, right? So we know that toddlers use these schemas to construct knowledge about objects and about people. They're taking in new information, they're making sense of what they know with that new information, and maybe modifying what they know based on what they just experienced. Now, many of you might be familiar with play schemas, which I think is a very helpful application of theory to real life, right? This interaction with objects. And they've been so well articulated by Athey and Arnold and Nut-Brown and other people. But things like the orientation schema, where you're trying to get a different views of things from inside the play kitchen and on top of the play kitchen. Or the rotation schema, where you're working with round objects and round ideas. Or the enclosing schema, where you're interested in putting things inside of things, right? Or sometimes putting yourself inside of something. And there's a whole bunch of other schemas, and they're just so valuable to know, in my experience, because they really help you understand what children are doing, not seeing toddler behavior as testing, but as more as exploration and understanding. So what I saw in my research was a tremendous amount of repetition and varying in their interactions with peers and objects, right? So one child might interact with another with a ball, and then might do that repeatedly with that same child over and over again. Or maybe they would go to a different child and introduce a different object, or a different child with the same object, or just keep switching around, all these variations, all these repetitions in order to get a large sample size so they can really learn, how is this person reacting? How does this person react? Are they reacting in the same way? Does the object matter? What's happening here? Because I'm doing the same action over and over again. I also noticed, it's sort of like what happens with the play schemas, that certain children had certain schemas that they would seem to be particularly working on. So the youngest child, Brown Stripes, was working on giving. He did so much giving. Green Stripes was working on giving and taking. Pink Pants was working on sharing play concepts, most of all. Blue Pants was working a lot on extending her hand. Red Pants was working a lot on approaching other children. And Gray Shirt, the oldest, was the receiver of a lot of giving. So he had a lot of time practicing how to receive different play objects, food, all sorts of things. And when I was doing my research, I ran across this quote that I really like and I find helpful in thinking about what I was seeing. This idea that we communicate with objects, not just about them, right? So oftentimes we think, oh, they want the toy that the other child has. But that the toy is a means of communication itself, I think, is a really important thing for us to sort of keep in mind. So, there it is. So I would like us to consider that rather than thinking of these so much as sharing or not sharing, that we consider them interaction schemas, kind of a parallel idea to the play schemas, that reflect these impulses to interact with peers and learn sort of basic social understanding and skills. So the interaction schemas include all those sharing ideas that I showed with you earlier, but some others as well, just things like looking, right? And a whole bunch of other things. Let me show you a few of those. So I would call it the taking schema, taking place here on the center carpet with red pants and pink pants, and this happens at the very beginning of class. Here comes pink pants. Oh, I'm going to take that from you. So there is an example of taking, right? And this actually, this behavior got repeated near the end of class, and actually the next time they met, it was almost becoming, it seemed like it was becoming ritualistic. Here's another interaction schema, the give and take schema. On the bottom right on this mattress, you're going to see brown stripes and green stripes. You can't see the olive green stripes, but they're going to have an O-ball exchange hands. Brown stripes brought it, green stripes takes it. Brown stripes is still hanging out. So hopefully you were able to see that O-ball exchange hands 5 times and a couple attempts to sort of get it in front of brown stripes again, but he didn't notice every one of them. And pink pants tried to get involved too. But what I also observed in this research is that a lot of the children could only work on dyads, working with 2 people. Only the older children were able to handle 3 people at a time. But so this exchanging hands, it requires taking, right? Taking is a necessary activity in order to get into give and take. And you have to know how to take. So here's another example of the protect schema and the taking schema once again. In the bottom left, in Dad's lap, we have gray shirt, and red pants is going to come over. These are the 2 oldest children. He's trying to take it, and he protects it. And red pants decides to find something else to do. So that's the taking schema and the holding on. That was only really exhibited by the oldest children, right? Which makes some sense. So the interaction schemas, I think, can really help us understand toddler interactions with peers, right? How they're learning to interact with peers. And I went back to Piaget, who really brought this idea of schemas. And a couple of the things that he said were that the child begins to react to persons in a more and more specific manner because they behave differently from things and because they behave according to schemas which bear some relationship to the child's own action, right? So they are learning that humans behave differently, just like a ball behaves differently from a block, right? And they need to explore that fully. And the other benefit of sort of seeing this as schemas, I think, is it helps us understand how these schemas that are initially centered on the child's own action become the means by which they construct an object and decentered universe, right? It's how they exit, potentially, their egocentrism, right? Is this interaction with the other person. Some people might say it's prerequisite. Some people might say it's partly how that happens. It's the way it happens. So the other thing I noticed about these interaction schemas is that the children were really using them to learn how to enter into peer play. And Sterling, Honig, and Thompson identified 4 skills toddlers need to enter into peer play. First, they have to understand how to initiate contact with another person. Then they need to understand how to recognize a friendly bid, right? We saw some friendly bids that weren't understood or at least acted on. They need to understand how to sustain play with a peer. And then they need to learn how to respond appropriately to ensure a positive peer engagement. So 4 different pieces. You can see sort of how they build and allow 2 children to come together and interact, and then eventually more and more children, right? They have to have mastered these 4 steps. And what I found is that as I thought about the schemas I was observing in this model, they really mapped actually quite nicely to this model. And I could see that some of the schemas served multiple purposes, right? So if I want to initiate contact with a peer, right, one way is to approach them. I can look at them. I might give them an object. I might take an object. I might share a play concept. There's a lot of these were used to initiate contact. In terms of how to recognize a friendly bid, right, there can be this mutual looking that's required to understand what's going on with this person, right? Sharing space, sharing a play concept. These are ways to sort of start recognizing a friendly bid. And taking is also a way to recognize a friendly bid, because when somebody offers you something, you do have to take it in order to receive. Ways to sustain play, we're giving back. So, and getting into that give and take. Giving back is sort of on the way to give and take. And then ultimately mutually using something is a nice way to sustain play. And then finally, this how to respond appropriately to ensure a positive peer engagement. With some of the older children, I saw them do things like making room for another child around a similar object, right? Or the oldest child saying thank you when he received a gift. I saw him go from a process of receiving something and just putting it to the side to sort of maybe almost learning in the class that he should actually hold it and say thank you. It was interesting to watch what he did. So all of these schemas sort of serving this process of learning how to interact, how to start engaging with other people in a positive way. Now, Piaget also said that schemas relative to persons are cognitive and affective simultaneously, right? Our feeling life. The affective element is perhaps more important in the domain of persons and the cognitive element in the domain of things, but it is only a question of degree. So both our learning, up in our mind and also sort of our feeling life are being engaged. And that's the other piece that I felt like I saw here. I saw these interaction schemas really spur these early interactions that then started to lead to this a little bit more of a relationship, even in two classes, and that have the potential to lead to early friendship. So it's recognized by Howes that the early toddler period, 13 to 24 months, is a time when children move from a preferred partner in their play to stable friendships. That's actually pretty early, right? When they have the opportunity to be together. And these earliest friendships are characterized by displayed, well-rehearsed routines and rituals. So for example, I couldn't help but think that this displayed, like this repetitive taking that Pink Pants would do with Red Pants was this effort for her to get something going, that she liked this person. She was trying to establish more of a relationship with this person. So the development of pro-social behavior, that is that empathy, helping, and sharing, is an important part of human life and plays an important role in peer acceptance and successful social interactions. And I thought that was just such a great reminder that actually these play a role in our social life. They are not the goal of our social life, but they play a role in it. And so one of the things I would like to sort of see is that, my apologies, is that we treat sharing more as a means to interaction and relationship more than a goal in itself. I think oftentimes we're, and it's kind of cultural, but we look for sharing, and that sharing feels good. They're sharing, that's the goal, they've done it. And instead of seeing things that way, I'd love us to start seeing sharing as a means to building interpersonal skills and intelligence, and ultimately forming the first friendships. So in conclusion, I'd love to see us reframe sharing, whether they were sharing or not. Those are early sharing behaviors or not to you. But reframe sharing and center the peer-to-peer learning and relationships instead. Now, it's my perspective that there were many types of early sharing behaviors in this research. That's my perspective. You don't have to agree with me. But I did notice that sharing is something toddlers between 16 and 24 months naturally do, with or without encouragement or direction, in a respectful, trusting environment. I'd like to see that the interaction schemas decenter sharing as a goal behavior, right? Let's move sharing over to the side and see the interaction as the most important thing. And recognize that sharing behaviors are just among the interaction schemas children use to learn about human interaction outside the family and develop their peer interaction skills and their first friendships. And using interaction schemas will help us support peer-to-peer learning in the early years, it's my hope, right? So my suggestion is to look for those repetitive behaviors with peers and consider what the child is working on learning, right? Is it about my peer? Is it about this action? Recognize that the impulse and the spontaneity of the interaction schemas, right? They are impulses, just like the play schemas. Move away from judging toddlers for not sharing or taking objects, right? It's part of how they interact. It's part of how they are going to learn to interact and hone those skills for the future. And I'd like to think, because I know many of us already do this, but protect that infant toddler classroom as a place for children to learn about their peers and their social and build those social skills, those early building blocks of social skills. Now, some ways to do this in the classroom are to provide some objects that have multiple pieces to make a whole, right? So that they can be mutually enjoyed, or duplicates that allow for shared play concepts and mutual use. It's also valuable, though, to keep some unique objects that offer opportunities for give and take and alternative behaviors, right? There was a trivet in this classroom that created a lot of interest after the oldest child made use of it, turned it into a hat, of course. And I watched the trivet through the course of the class, and eventually every child got to use the trivet by one mechanism or another, by trying to take it, as we saw Red Pants do, by waiting, all sorts of different things that they did. So just really having some things that cause some unique interactions and will cause some other kinds of learning. And again, because I put such a premium on the RIE sort of environment that we can create, I'd like to encourage us to use the RIE principles to sort of support this interaction learning, right? So having that basic trust in the children to initiate, explore, and learn from their experiences, I think is so important. Having an environment that allows them to do what they would naturally do, which in my perspective is that they will naturally share if we allow them the space to do so. Not all the time, not every child, but there's that potential. The freedom to explore and interact with other infants means that they get to interact and have the interaction. You saw how long some of those interactions were, from 5 seconds to 8 minutes long. Imagine if we interrupted, right, that we might really stop something that's happening that's interesting, right? We want to let them have that time for uninterrupted play. Of course, we have clearly defined limits. We don't let children hurt each other over objects. I just always want to say that to make sure we're clear about that. But also to realize outside of the classroom that we're really using those caregiving times to give the experience of positive and enjoyable interactions, right? That sets an understanding of what interacting as a pleasurable experience, which is hopefully what they're going to get in life, right? And finally, this sensitive observation, just encouraging you again to look for the entire interaction. Recognize that sometimes when we look over and we see one component action, as I called them, that might be one piece of a very long arc of interaction that's going on, and we need to sort of step back and take another minute to really see what's happening before we decide if we need to step in or not. Now, if all that just seems too laissez-faire and too good to be true, I do want to share with you what the research says about interventions. And Warnick and Tomasello said that parental reinforcement of compliant pro-social behavior, that is reinforcing, share or please share, oh, you shared, that is negatively correlated with pro-social behaviors toward peers 2 years later. So it's not that effective. And in contrast, bringing the children's attention to the other's feelings, needs, thoughts, or intentions has been shown to be the most effective socialization practice. And in essence, that's what we call sportscasting in RIE, right? We bring attention to what's happening, what we think is going on, right? They were playing with that. You want it too. Those kinds of things. That is one of the most effective socialization practices there is, according to these researchers. Finally, I'd also like to recommend that you consider the social skills framework when you're watching a child's behavior. Just think about, is this a weird way that they're trying to initiate an interaction? Like, it's not sort of like what we would do, but it's what they are trying to in order to learn. Is this a way to initiate an interaction, right? Are they trying to learn how to recognize a friendly bid? Are they working on sustaining something by taking something away so that they can have some more of that give and take? Are they learning how to respond appropriately to ensure this sort of positive, pure kind of engagement and relationship, right? And then recognize these are the building blocks for forming these early relationships. So observing the schemas sort of between two children over the course of a class or day. What role are they playing? What's this relationship starting to look like? And look for those repeated behaviors and rituals between two children, because that might start to signal there's more of a relationship developing here, according to the research. So I will almost close with this quote, that the rudiments of virtually all the sophisticated skills we observe in older children's social play emerge in the first 2 years. And I hope that you can see that so much of that is what I was fortunate enough to see in my research in a RIE classroom via video, and that you can see potentially in your spaces as well. So the theme of this has been of this conference is thriving in challenging times, and clearly on a macro level, we're living in some challenging times, but on a micro level, sort of toddler interactions can be a challenging time for people who support toddlers and for the toddlers themselves. And it's my hope that we can really foster those healthier infant toddler brains and sort of hearts by applying the interaction schemas, thinking of what they're doing more as a schematic than something that we might judge, recognizing the learning that's going on. There's interpersonal understanding and skills being built. We can learn how to observe that how important the relationships they have with peers are, and that they're just starting to do those kinds of things and build those kind of relationships. And finally, that through the schemas, we can really have just a more relaxed feeling about it all and help the child maintain a secure relationship with us, with the adults who care for them, and make them feel understood. So thank you so much. That is my presentation for you. And now I'd love to know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for sharing that in-depth knowledge and your work with us. You've given me, and I'm sure the participants, a lot to think about. I appreciate that. There are some questions. We will start the next session. I just want to say the next session will start at 2:15 instead of 2. So we do have about 10 or 15 minutes here for questions. So one of the first questions, kind of going back to what you were sharing at the beginning about the way that you interpret gestures. Mm-hmm. The question is, what methodology do you use to interpret gestures?
That's an excellent question. And I think the methodology I used was it was rather simplistic. It wasn't a formal methodology, but I did have the benefit of video. And so I observed these interactions. What I first saw, I would go over them slowly, and observe them multiple times to observe sort of what was happening in terms of the gestures. And I broke down every interaction into all the component parts so that I could see it. For me, it was like taking an overall gesture into like many sort of, again, those component parts, those small bits. There were 825 of them that I observed, and I compiled them and put them together that way. That was my way of sort of trying to make it more objective.
Thank you. And sensitive observation, I'm sure, was a huge part of that.
Well, yeah, sensitive observation. Sorry, that's maybe goes, I guess it went for me without saying, but sensitive observation was the first thing, right? Yes.
Right.
And I will admit that, of course, I have my own viewpoint, my own eyes. And there's a lot of discussion in the research world about whether there really is such a thing as objective research, right? We all come at things with our own eyes. So you've seen things from my perspective, but I did do my work of analyzing and using sensitive observation to try to make it not just like what I think.
Right. That makes sense. Not subjective. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this question is, can you help me make sense of what children are learning when they grab a specific toy another child is playing with? Mm-hmm. In this participant's classroom with 2.5-year-olds, this happens a lot. Mm-hmm. And they will always insist that a specific toy, even if they have another similar toy around them, they will insist on that specific toy.
The child will insist on it?
Right, the taking, I think.
Yeah. Well, so I think that, to me, that does always beg the question of, is it about the toy, right? If there's another one right there, or is it about I'm wanting to interact with this person or something else, right? Now, my research was really just between 16 and 23 months old. So I would definitely say that it can change and probably does change as the children get older, right? I saw my older children starting to take and try to protect an object, which the younger children didn't do. As they moved into that next developmental stage, whether you're thinking about the pre-operational stage or you're thinking about moving from give and take to holding on and letting go, Erickson's stages, I think there are different things going on. I think it can be, again, I'd say go to the earlier Head Start stuff. It's amazing, and they do break things down by age groups. And I think it can be really that, I think of that phase as sort of cause and effect learning. And so they might be trying to test more cause and effect at that phase. But I'd encourage you to do your own research. And I really would encourage people to videotape in their classroom if they can, because I did notice there were so many things going on in that space at a single time that, while there was a 5-minute interaction here, there was an 8-minute interaction over there. And so really having videotape can really help you have a deeper understanding of what's kind of going on overall. So
Yeah, I like that. What you're saying, is it really about the toy? It seems like it's about the toy, but is it more just about that relationship, learning each other, and going back to what Patty was talking about in the last workshop about how to be together?
That's right.
How do we
Right. I mean, I really think that this idea that we communicate with objects, not just about them, is a really important sort of thing for me to remember. And that it is this sort of, depending on where they're coming from, when they're, where they might be in different stages of this, having this opportunity to experience another child fully, right? Sometimes children come to us when they're toddlers. Sometimes we get them as infants. And so they have more of this experience of getting to interact. And so they'll all come into our classroom at different phases, depending. But I think it's worth questioning, what is it about?
It's interesting that you say that, because there's another question that kind of blends with that topic well, which is, how does social emotional development get impacted when children don't have the opportunities to engage with peers of similar ages and infants and toddlers and kind of practice these interactions?
Right. Well, that my subject is a vast one. I had this much of it, and I think that's getting a little bit out of it. But some of the research that I did see, I could say, did show that children who have the opportunity to explore freely with their peers as toddlers do have, I think they called it more sophisticated social play, right? They just had the experience, right? They have more experience already under their belt. So I don't know that I would say anybody else has a deficit, but I'd say that they have some experience that apparently can be beneficial.
Right, thank you. Somebody wants to know if this work, I think maybe your thesis, is it published anywhere?
It's in the library at Pacific Oaks, but I haven't published it yet or done anything like that. I have created an article for all of you that is going to be loaded onto Whova for you, that sort of summarizes this view of interaction schemas. So you can consider it some more if you think it has merit, or if you see it in your classroom.
Thank you. Okay, there's another question. How can we help children recognize friendly bids when it comes to sharing?
I think that we can create the space and time for them to do it. This is a bias of mine. You could sportscast it, I think would be the thing to do if you wanted to be more involved and you wanted to scaffold it more. I tend to personally be of the belief system that they just need space and time, because it's really they that need to learn what this is, and they have the full capacity to do that.
Right. Like you could say, it looks like she wants to hand you that shovel, or you could just let it be.
Yeah, I think those are your two solid options.
Right. I was wondering if you had any feedback for those who, are practicing the seeing, sharing, and these relationships through this lens, which is very non-mainstream. But then you go out into the mainstream world. So, at the park, right? And you're allowing children to engage in this way with each other, but you have, the mainstream culture getting in the way of that balance. So do you have any feedback for how to handle that?
Yeah, yes. I mean, that's a classic challenge for anyone who's trying to work with some of our RIE concepts, for example, the educaring approach, but certainly also with these, if you try to take this interaction schema viewpoint to the park. I think the main thing is that I always try to remember I'm bringing my child to a setting. And if that's what this situation is, you're a parent and you're taking your child to a setting. And it's always important to gauge what other parents are comfortable with. And so I might know that most of the time I'm working with my child in this way when I hopefully have some friends or a classroom where I can take them and we can work with it in this way. But there's sometimes when I take them to the park and there I might say, oh, I'm sorry, my child took this toy from you, or whatever to the parent. If I could visibly see the parent is upset, I might go and do the work of repairing that relationship with the parent. I think of that as my job, less my child's job, but trying to see what I can do. And so trying to give them some freedom to do these things, but again, reading the room and knowing what will create a smooth environment for my child that day versus what would be really disruptive to everybody.
Right. That's really good advice. Thank you. Let's see, does anyone else, there was another question earlier on about hearing the definition of sharing, but I think that you definitely covered that.
Mm-hmm.
See if there's any other questions
Go to your dictionary or merriam-webster.com if you want to find it.
Right. Okay, here's another question. Remind me the name of the research that found emphasizing sharing feedback versus feeling.
Is that the last piece that I talked about?
That was more effective. Feeling narration, or I'm not sure if it's worded correctly. The name of the research that found that emphasizing sharing feedback versus feeling.
Was not so effective, right? Reinforcing sharing was not effective 2 years later. It actually had a negative correlation, meaning they didn't share as much as other kids did. That piece, I think. That is Warnick and Tomasello. I don't know off the top of my head the name of that research, but I do think I reference it in my article.
Great. And that would be uploaded on the Whova app. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you all again for bumping your time a little bit to accommodate the technical difficulties at the beginning. Just like all the workshops in the conference, the recordings will be available in the next 48 hours or so and available for 60 days after the conference is over. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your attention and interest, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to answer them offline on Whova. Okay. Take care.
Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
Bye.